And good afternoon, Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program. And my guest is Kelly Sadler. Kelly is she is a communications director for America First Action. She's a former special assistant to President Donald J. Trump. Kelly, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Kelly, I'm hoping that you can help us make sense out of this whole business of the General Flynn unmasking and the what President Trump is calling Obamagate. Could you give us a little background on that? What's going on with that?
Well, I'm afraid it started in the spring of 2016 when you had the FBI basically start an investigation on the Trump campaign because they were worried about the Trump campaign might be tied to Russia or there might be some collusion going on. And all of this, of course, was based on the phony Steele dossier, which has been completely discredited and was part of the DNC's Oppo research. And then you had basically the FBI surveil Carter Page, Michael Flynn, whatnot, to gather information on them and their ties to Russia. What happened with General Flynn's unmasking, however, is in particularly serious because it happened during the transition period. It was after President Trump won in 2016. It was between the time he won and the time that he came into office. Then you had Obama in the Oval Office with Joe Biden and others ask for General Flynn to be unmasked. And Joe Biden actually put that request in. And the same day that he was unmasked, his name appeared in the Washington Post. It was leaked to the national news media to encourage this Russia collusion narrative, which really dominated the headlines for President Trump's first 3.5 years in office. And it was all made up and based on the phony Steele dossier. It absolutely was, entrapment by General Flynn, by the FBI, who wanted him to either lie or admit some untruth so he wouldn't come in as the NSA director. And let's just say Michael Flynn knew where the bodies were buried, and the Obama administration was very scared that once he came into a powerful position, he'd get right down to their schemes.
Now, the phony Steele dossier, that was created by Michael Steele, who was hired by this Fusion GPS, this dirty tricks group in Washington. He was a British agent, and there were some other agents involved, like this Mifsud character in Italy, and some other rather shady figures on the international scene, not American, which tells me that they were basically contracting this out to foreigners so that they would not get in trouble in the United States, because what they were doing essentially was the same thing, if not a lot worse, than what Nixon had done with Watergate. This is like the Watergate break-in. I mean, this is except they would subcontract it out. Now, when they brought this Steele dossier to the FISA court, first of all, who brought it, and did they consciously know that this was a political document, that it was a fake document?
Well, they all knew that it was a political document because they knew it was from Fusion GPS, and they knew that the DNC contracted with Fusion GPS in order to get this Oppo research. But they were willing to believe that it was true at the time. And you had Steele, who was working with foreign intelligence officers as well as the Russians to gather this phony information. And that's what kind of spiked this crossfire hurricane team within the FBI that was led by James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper at the time, to see what the connections were on the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, and Russia. They knew that the Steele dossier was Oppo research, but they used it in going to the FISA courts to warrant the surveillance on people like Carter Page and George Papadopoulos and Michael Flynn. And the IG report that came out of the DOJ exposed them, that they used the dossier as a crucial point in getting these surveillance warrants, even though that they knew it was Oppo research.
So they also knew that there was no connection whatsoever, and this came out with the recently declassified documents by Attorney General William Barr, that they knew there was no connection between the Trump campaign and Russia. but they consciously went forward and they defrauded the FISA courts. Now, the real illegality here, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that the real problem here is the committing fraud against the FISA courts. That's the kind of thing that across the board in our system of justice, if you defraud a court to get a certain outcome and do so consciously, that's a crime. I mean, that's a serious issue. It's a felony. So is there proof that they knew that this was a phony dossier? Because if they did, then they did engage in this particular crime.
Well, it's hard for me to imagine that they didn't know it was a political document, and that was funded. It was opposition research. I believe that they believed that there was something there, and they were just trying to do their best to prove it. That they were, part of the resistance. They did not want to have President Trump win the election. You had, folks like Lisa Page and her boyfriend saying that we need to have a backup, an insurance policy if this president wins. And you had, they were so scared that this president was going to win that they needed to have to tie him to some sort of Russia collusion narrative, which after, 2 years of a Bob Mueller special counsel investigation determined was absolutely, there was no there. But then you also had, it's a crime to lie and defraud the FISA courts. But then there's also, this was a classified national security investigation, and it was leaked to the mainstream media. The Steele dossier was leaked to the mainstream media. The investigation itself that was going on was leaked to the mainstream media. But meanwhile, the Trump campaign was kept in the dark. And there were intelligence briefings of which James Comey and, the brass within the intelligence agencies never once came to the Trump campaign and said, we think there might be a mole in your campaign or it might be compromised. They did that with Dianne Feinstein when it was discovered that she had a Russian asset actually serving in her senatorial seat. But they never did this with the Trump campaign. I believe this was intentional to keep them in the dark so that they could do something like an entrapment, of which they ultimately did to Michael Flynn.
And then, of course, when Trump came into office, Comey said to him that there was no investigation, and that basically they then asked Michael Flynn to come in to have an informal meeting saying that there was not under investigation. They told him, he said, should I bring a lawyer? They said, no, don't bring a lawyer. This is Andrew McCabe. And then they basically engaged, they asked some questions of which they already knew the answer. It was the kind of thing that has become a problem in recent years with prosecutors and even with district attorneys, where they bring somebody in and they try to get them to say, well, you were seen with this person on March 3rd, were you? And they know it was March 4th. And it turns out, that's what they did to Scooter Libby. And some of the same people involved in the entrapment of General Flynn were involved in the Scooter Libby thing, including Comey. So you had, him come in, and then they asked him questions. He wasn't allowed to, he didn't have a lawyer. He didn't tape anything. And they caught him on some technical matter where he didn't quite remember it the way they said it happened. And then they called in and they said that he lied, and they charged him with a crime. This is, it's such a miscarriage of justice that this would go on. I wonder why, more liberals and more Democrats aren't outraged at this, whether they like President Trump or not. This is a matter of is this how we conduct our business in this country?
They should absolutely be outraged, but the mainstream media has not been reporting on all of the news that Rick Grinnell has declassified, and partly it's because they've been complicit in the narrative spreading. Their sources were sources at the top level of the Obama administration. My goodness, they won Pulitzer Prizes on the Russiagate and the Russia collusion narrative. So now to come out and say our sources were wrong, or we naively accepted that as the truth and we were wrong, that's a pill too big for them to swallow, to admit that they were wrong and that they were misled. The mainstream media was complicit in spreading these lies and these rumors, and they're also being very complicit in covering up for the Obama administration, Vice President Joe Biden, and the wrongdoings that were committed at that time.
And Vice President Biden has his fingernails all over this thing. Yeah. So then you have President Trump being advised by none other than Rod Rosenstein, who was the Assistant Attorney General, after Attorney General Sessions had, for some reason, recused himself from this whole business, which is, I think, something we should have an explanation for. But putting that aside, he then recommends that President Trump fire Comey. He does fire Comey, which is perfectly within his purview as
Right.
President of the United States. And then a day or two later, Rod Rosenstein steps in and he appoints Mueller, who was his mentor and who was mentor to Comey, as special prosecutor. And that launched this whole investigation, which cost $30 million and which involved entrapping several people for things that had nothing to do with Russia, and which gave the media this shrill and hysterical headline. I remember getting special bulletins from the Boston Globe. I mean, you're ready to have a heart attack. Oh my God, Trump said that, it turned out to be nothing. The next day it disappears. Rachel Maddow, oh my God, she's every night with these conspiracy theories and, emphasizing every little nuance. They must have known this was fake, but yet they were on this agenda to really take down President Trump, our duly elected leader. And that went on for 3 years. The most egregious figure of all, I think, in that whole rotten episode is this Adam Schiff, who went around the media, getting his face on television multiple times a day, waving this proverbial paper in the air. I have proof. I have evidence, that Trump was a spy for Russia, which is, I mean, on the surface, it sounds unbelievable. He never produced that proof. It's worse than what they accused Senator McCarthy of doing, right? I have proof of communists in the State Department. I to this day, I still tweet him asking to see the proof. He's never shown it. To my way of thinking, that should be not a crime, but certainly a cause for resignation.
Well, and then it was not only Adam Schiff who didn't have any smoking gun after he went on CNN and MSNBC saying that he had evidence of Russia collusion. It was also those behind the scenes, James Clapper, Brennan, McCabe, who went on air and said one thing, that we feel very strongly that there's ties of the Trump campaign to Russia, but then when they gave their, when they were under oath in Congress in these closed door sessions, admitted that there was no real evidence that they had, and so they knowingly went out there and spread a narrative to discredit this president before he even stepped into office, and then knowingly did so in the 3 years afterwards. I mean, James Clapper is still on CNN spreading his lies and just on Friday, he was on CNN and they asked him about the unmasking. He's like, it's very uncommon in intelligence, investigations to unmask people. And then the questioner was like, well, I mean, what's criminal is leaking these names to the press. And that's all of a sudden when he had an internet malfunction and his computer went down and he was unable for the rest of the interview.
Right. And they unmasked hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And there's these allegations that Obama himself was holding meetings at the White House, within weeks of relinquishing the presidency and talking about, having this agenda go forward and getting at Michael Flynn and doing these other things that would hobble the presidency of the incoming president. I don't think there's anything quite like that in American history. I mean, this is like, I don't want to use the T word here, like treason, but, and I don't think it actually is by the letter, but it certainly is a subversive agenda here. And I don't know if Obama will ever be held accountable for that. I don't really care. I don't think it's too much to ask that he might be, because that's too distracting. He's the next president. He's out of office. Thank goodness. But can we? I mean, are the American people going to begin to understand what's going on here, in spite of all the media spin? I mean, this is really a terrible precedent that was set.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you. And AG Barr, as you know, has an investigation into the origins of the Russia collusion conspiracy theory. He said, and John Durham is conducting that investigation, And, he said this whole thing is unprecedented in American history, that there never before has been a scandal like this. And although he does not anticipate on criminally charging Obama or Vice President Joe Biden, there are others on his list. And I suspect the others on his list are James Comey, James Clapper, John Brennan, the folks that knowingly leaked classified information to the mainstream media, and that is a criminal felony.
Well, all we could do is hope that justice is eventually served, and it may happen slowly, but as long as we're moving in the right direction, it protects the system. It ensures that this kind of thing doesn't happen. I mean, this is everything that I recall years ago the left used to complain about, with the FBI and whatnot, and the Department of Justice. And here it is. They were right. This can happen, and it has happened. And of course, it's probably too much today to talk about the whole Ukrainian hoax. We'll leave that for another day. I mean, that's just as bad. In fact, it's actually quite worse. But here we are entering the election season. I think that right at the beginning of the pandemic, I heard rumblings from Schiff and Nadler and others that they wanted to hold hearings to try to look at whether or not Trump had done something impeachable. They want to impeach him again. And that they wanted to subpoena some people, and President Trump, including Dr. Fauci, and President Trump said, no one associated with my administration is going to go to this house. And I think he's absolutely right, because they're not interested in holding a hearing to find out what the heck is going on. They want to try to find out. It's like the phone call to the Ukrainian president. Did he say this on this day versus that day? Impeach him. And so, I mean, it's such a vicious thing to see that the loyal opposition in this country instead is trying to take down the government, literally. Yeah. I mean, I hope people can understand that. If you don't like President Trump, vote against him. That's fine. But he is elected. He is the president. And this is not a banana republic where we just simply take somebody out if we don't like them. You oppose him based on ideas. That's fine. But what's going on here is not that. They are trying to take him down. That's what they've done, and I think they're still trying to do it. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with you. If there's going to be a House investigation into the coronavirus, it should be an investigation into China and what they knew and when they knew it, and how they basically kept the entire international community in the dark as to the human-to-human transmission of the virus, and whether or not, and influencing the WHO into when to declare, an international pandemic. That's where the true investigation needs to start. In terms of the president's handling of this, he got off to a rocky start in terms of building up testing, but then through private-public partnerships, that is where it needs to be. The PPE is there, the ventilators are there, the hospital beds are open. That was all about, the reason why we needed to flatten the curve and stay home. Now it's time to reopen the economy, and Democrats and Republicans should be working together on issues on how to rebuild this economy, not what Nancy Pelosi put forward last week, which was basically a $3 trillion slush fund for Democratic ideals. These efforts should go right to the front lines, right to, the medical communities and medical workers, the states that have been impacted the most, not on doing mail-in voter registry by November, or funding the United States Postal Office, or their other pet projects. I mean, Democrats never let a good crisis go to waste, and we shouldn't be playing politics in this time. But unfortunately, they are, and they will continue to do so.
That's right. I mean, at this time, we should focus on the pandemic. That's expensive enough. Let's help people who are impacted by that, not put in their pet projects. And while they're at investigating, I'd like to see the New York governor investigated for this mandate in March, where he literally had COVID-19 positive patients put into nursing homes. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, the stupidity of it, the venality of that. I mean, I'd like to see that explained. If he was a Republican, he'd probably be, not just resigned, he'd probably be up on charges right now. But putting that aside, Kelly, how do you think things look for the November election, both in terms of President Trump's prospects for re-election and for the Congress? Do you think we can take back the House?
I hope we can take back the House. That one's going to be a harder battle. The president, he built this economy when he came into office through deregulation, tax cuts. He really stimulated it with his policies, and he can rebuild this economy. And we need a commander in chief who understands the importance of capitalism and free markets and allowing small businesses to thrive and to get back on their feet. The contrast that with Joe Biden, who spent 47 years in public service and is vowing to basically correct the problems that he caused while he was in office. He's leaning towards socialistic ideas, the support of the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, giving free health care to illegal immigrants, relieving student debt. These are not the initiatives that we need to focus right now on as the American people and as the economy is under siege. We can't spend our way out of this problem. We need to revive the entrepreneurial spirit of the Americans to get these small businesses back up and running.
Well, very well stated, and I think that's a very solid theme for the upcoming election, and an argument that will resonate with people. Kelly Sadler, I want to thank you for joining me. Is there any website that you'd like to give out, or any way you want people to reach you or read your articles?
Sure. You can follow me at Kelly Riddell on Twitter. You can also go to our website at www.a1apac.org. And if you want to learn more about Joe Biden and his comfy ties with China, you can go to BeijingBiden.com.
Excellent. Kelly, thanks so much for joining me. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.